Today we have with us Mr. Parag Shirnamé. He is the Queensland Trade Representative to India. He's going to share his views on how India and Queensland can be complementary in nature to each other. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you could tell us that you were appointed as the representative of Queensland Trade Commission last year. So in this 1 year, what has your feedback been from, say, Indian industries?
1 year has seen a lot of shift in this market, both from the business confidence perspective, but also from the opportunities which it is generating. And I feel that this is probably the right time for the relationships between India and the state of Queensland to take off in the right directions. Having said that, there has been a substantial amount of investments, as you're probably aware, in the resource sector and also in some of the infrastructure areas of cooperation. We had quite a few chains of food and other franchisees also come and work here. But more importantly, I think what's happening here with the growing, emerging middle class in India is a story which is not yet fully unfolded. So there's a large amount of interest from Queensland government and the businesses to both look into this market and also invite businesses from India to come and invest in Queensland.
Okay. And the focus areas for this between, as you were explaining earlier, could you just tell me again what you said about the complementary nature of trade that is possible between India and Queensland?
Absolutely. I think there is an amazing growth story which is happening here in India, and the growth for any good economy pillars around three major things. And we find that the Queensland economy and the government is able to help in all these three major pillars. First of all, it is resources. A country can grow, and its economic growth involves resources so that there is a reliable quality partner who can help supply the needs, the energy needs of its emerging middle class. So there's the first bit. So we talk about resources a bit. The second aspect of this growth is infrastructure. So there's many overlapping areas where both we can share technologies happening in infrastructure from Queensland into India, and also invite some of the Indian companies to come and have a look at what are the stories unfolding back in Queensland. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And the third aspect is agriculture. Extremely important that India is self-reliant, but also picks up the technologies which are similar in the climatic conditions which are required for agriculture. And I was mentioning to you a little earlier that what India really shares with Queensland and vice versa is a tropical and subtropical climate and the conditions under which all the agriculture happens. So there's a lot of technology, a lot of know-how which has been developed, and we are more than happy to share that with the market here.
Okay. And why do you think that so far this potential has not been exploited or explored?
I would say that to some extent there has been some movement in exploring things like resources. For example, if there's a need for coal, let's take that as an example. It's okay to procure coal, but if you want a long-term supply which is secured for you, then typically an entity from India would look at procuring a stake in a mine in Queensland or looking at developing their own. So while some big conglomerates like Adani's and GVK's have taken the bold step, there are smaller proponents also available which could be quite lucrative for several Indian companies. My observation has been that whilst we've been quite scouting the area, looking at some of these companies, a lot of the equity stakes and deals have been taken over by other countries. I would like to see a lot more activity and happening from our Indian companies back in the resource sector. The second thing is in terms of infrastructure. There are huge amount of development both in rail, port and transport infrastructure which is happening in Queensland. And I invite a lot of the Indian companies to come and have a look and see if they can actually come and build those things in Queensland. Some of these projects are quite exciting, one of which involves a tunnel which has got a railway below and a bus track on top of it, and it goes under the whole sea as well. So it's an amazing sort of infrastructure opportunity which needs that sort of a capability back in India. So it's good impetus to also build our capabilities both in-house here and go out and pick up these real investment opportunities and infrastructure opportunities in Queensland. And the third aspect in terms of agriculture, there's a huge amount of agri-invest and agri-technology that we can bring into the country, particularly in areas like food grain and handlage, supply chain and logistics, frozen chain. There are many franchisees which would like to also enter in this market. And likewise, there are agri-investment opportunities which are available in Queensland, and they have a very wide-ranging gamut of offers, ranging from sorghum, which is into production of sugar, to fisheries, aqua farming, seafood, hydroponics, and quite a few opportunities which are available in the agricultural space as well. So I think this is a great time. Both the economies, the Indian economy GDP is around the 5% at the moment, and the GDP of Queensland is slightly larger than 4%. So the GDPs are also almost similar. There's a growth story in both the sides, and I think they can be a great story going forward.
Okay. And so far, the trade between Queensland and India has now started picking up, as you mentioned. But what do you see in your interaction with both traders here and there are the challenges that India needs to prepare for and India needs to kind of caution itself against while going into trade there?
I think the clarity of vision from the Indian companies in terms of how they would like to secure their growth is something we should really think about, give it a significant amount of consideration, because it's not about just procuring certain resources for a very short time. If you're planning on increasing your power generation in the country, then you need to ensure that for the next 10, 15 years or 20 years, you have a secure, reliable partner. Now, Queensland is open for business. We are part of the G20 dialogue, which is happening in Queensland, and India is part of that as well. Now, as part of that, the whole impetus is on growth in general economies and resilience in the economies. So Queensland is actually a very significant, sturdy partner, very competitive, and has proven itself to be reliable in terms of supply and has a very low sovereign risk. So from that perspective, I think it becomes a very attractive destination for Indian businesses to secure their future by engaging in trade transactions and investments with Queensland.
But they have not always done very well in aggressively pursuing assets outside the country. So I want to know the challenges that they could possibly face when they're dealing with a very different kind of an economic political setup in a much more organized, developed nation. So if you could just suggest, say, if I wanted to go tomorrow and trade with Queensland, XYZ things that I normally do here, I might want to be a little more careful about while doing there.
It's a very good point. I think whenever you look at international business, there is an aspect of business culture which comes into play, and I suppose that's what you're aiming towards. There is firstly a lot of information, credible information, which is available. So if you're going into any international market, the first thing you want to do is find out where this credible information is. So we can help with that. So Trade and Investments Queensland is very nicely positioned to point people in the right direction to government sources, to government databases and banks, and also to be able to point them to consulting firms who can look after the legal and other infrastructure for them to set up properly. But the second part of that is understanding how the business and the regulatory framework works. And my sort of advice to people who are looking at moving into new markets is to establish yourself in that market as an entry strategy and not as a flying visit. Okay. You cannot go in there and say, I spent 10, 15 days and now I come here, I know enough about it to start an operation. But you need to have a leg on the ground and work with credible agencies like us to actually point them in the right direction. And once you know enough about it, make an informed decision so that you can stay in that market and be successful.
And the challenges that you feel perhaps the government or the traders and companies from India need to address when traders from Queensland come to India, because there are a lot of restrictions through policy and other issues that keep coming up in the Indian economy. So you feel some of these that could be addressed, if you could give me a few examples, that the government perhaps need to start looking at quickly to secure their trade relations with a region like Queensland?
I think the news and the statements made by the government here in India has been very positively received. There is a sentiment of confidence, there's a sentiment of competitiveness, and I suppose excitement about the market now being I suppose welcoming enough for Queensland companies to set up. Having said that, quite a lot of companies have set up operations here, from aerospace engineering to architectural firms and quite a few. But to actually make it attractive enough vis-a-vis other economies, I think we need to have a very simple, I suppose, regulatory framework which allows companies to set up, have these joint ventures, ensure that their principal and their investments are secure in the market and they are able to repatriate their monies across. There's some security around those payment mechanisms. They're allowed to actually enter those markets with some sort of a program which allows incubation of that project for some time. So those are sorts of things to think about to make it quite attractive. Good examples are the special economic zones and those sorts of things which are being set up, but then they are restricted to only a few industries and exclude quite a lot of others.
Yeah. So you think a push for more specialized, simplified processes would help? That would help attract more Queensland investors to India?
I would say that it is that, and I suppose some sort of a framework within which they are able to feel more confident that their partners in this country are credible and they're meeting the right people and they would be honoring all the terms of their contracts and so on.
As of now, is there any special trade agreement between Queensland and India?
As a state to government level, no, we don't have a thing, but there are lots of research agreements in agriculture, there's educational areas, there are individual businesses which have come and set up their agreements here.
But are you aiming towards or moving towards perhaps a more concrete bilateral trade agreement between Queensland and India or Australia, in the sense that, you know, something concrete which is going to exist and it's not just an individual women fancy that some people might go, some people might not?
I think the trade agreement is more a federal matter, and I think it's been progress for quite some time as well. Between a state and a government, we haven't really got a trade agreement as such, but we have certainly worked with certain states in the past. In the past, we have had MOU between, say, for example, the government of Karnataka and the government of Queensland, and around which there was a lot of work being done, similar things being pursued by other states as well. So we do believe that India is not one big, package. It is actually broken into many states, and some of these states are relatively more active in their export, import and investment agendas. So we tend to work with these states and see, okay, which of these states are now ready for an international trade, and we are more than happy to work around agreements with these states.
Okay. Could you put some ballpark figures on the kind of potential you see vis-a-vis the sectors you mentioned between trade in India and Queensland? Is there some quantification, something that you could?
I could get back to you on the exact figures that you're talking about. But having said that, in sheer volumes, I think there is opportunity. There is quite a lot of opportunity to improve. I believe that over the next 2 to 3 years, we will see significant rise in trade. We'll see significant interest in India from Queensland companies. And I believe there will be a lot of investment opportunities which will be now in a way suited for Indian companies to pick up, because it's also a matter of some of the Indian companies being ready to pick them up going forward.
So what has changed between say 3 years ago and now, that you see this potential increasing now and over the next few years?
Well, I think there's a combination of the market reforms which the government has put in place over here, making it a safer, more reliable, credible market to go with. But also from the Queensland's perspective, there are investment proponents which Indian businesses are now able to pick up. For example, if it is building of a road or a bridge or even a small city, investment in hotels, tourism investments, islands, these sorts of things, which previously a lot of the companies here may not have looked at as an investment, probably focused on other things. Now I can see that because of economic growth here, some of the larger Indian companies can start looking at serious investments overseas.
Okay. So we understand that for at least traders and companies from Queensland, there's a market here. There are a number of things that either can be sold here or can be contributed here. Could you tell me what is the Indian contribution that would be possible in Queensland? One is the investment in, say, projects, but more than that, are there, like if you're talking about agriculture, what will be the goods that you would need in Queensland and what we could import? If you could give me specific examples of things that you see are going to grow.
Certainly. Look, agriculture is a space where there is a lot of ag investment available to Indian companies, and I mentioned before, like the areas of fisheries, areas of aqua farming. There's some amazing technologies which involve algae, and they're for bioremediation technologies, not only for cleaning of water, but also you could use those algae for food, you can use that algae for biodiesel and multiple products around that. There's technologies which can be sort of brought in for enhanced produce, looking at things like sugarcane, sorghum, mangoes, and things like that, which we could probably bring into the country. But also from the Indian perspective, to look at new technologies which may be of relevance to them for production back in Queensland. Things like hydroponics, fisheries, seafood processing, all those sorts of things which they might want to invest in. There's meat industry as well, but again, there's got to be some cold chain and frozen chain which needs to be developed back here in the country to match that.
Okay. From what I understand, Australia has been very big till very recently. They have been very pro-environment. All their policies have been very pro-environment. With the change in government last year, there was some stand that they said they were going to. Indian companies are not particularly known for kind of acknowledging the resources that they are using. So this dichotomy, how do you see that playing out? Because we saw in a couple of instances where they did invest but did not take into account the kind of pressure that the environmental lobby has internationally. In India, it's a lot less compared to, say, in Australia, Germany, anywhere. So how do you see that playing out?
See, there's no replacement for awareness. Being aware of what your investments are about, what the risk can be, is a commercial item. However, the Queensland government is committed to cut red tape and green tape. To give you a perspective, for approving of licenses, sometimes it could take up to 4 years in the past, whilst for Adani's, their approvals have come in less than a year's time.
Yes.
So that's a significant improvement in the way these regulatory framework has now been improved to assess and move it faster, so that there's minimal inconvenience to any investor coming in. In terms of impact on environment and estimation of the power, I suppose, of what a community drive could create, I think it's a matter of understanding the culture, understanding the rules of the game over there. But more importantly, also having the Queensland government as an ally working with you. So wherever possible, we have made every effort to ensure that the investors are looked after. And for example, look at the railway lines being made by the Iranis. It's many hundred kilometers railway line. It involves a lot of parcels of land with native title. All that has finally come to fruition. And that is by no means a small achievement as well. Yeah, so I think that's what it is. It's awareness, is going through the right channels, having your foot on the ground and dealing with situations as they come. You could have issues with the environment anyway, but to actually have a resolution on that quickly enough for you to move forward, that's the important part.
Okay. And you think that Queensland offers that as compared to, okay. And now with the new government there has been, would you believe that like in India, there has been a change in the industry sentiment? There is a huge kind of, till now there was a lot of anxiety and uncertainty, and now we see that, positive vibes are coming from everybody. So is that true even for Queensland? Has there been like a complete turnaround from, say, the previous regime to now?
The Queensland government has done pretty well. Now, there has been growth stories in all the 4 pillars it had indicated, which are the tourism, the resources and trade. But I think more importantly, it is the framework which the new government has created for the future growth, which is more important rather than just, I suppose, the runs on the board. And for resources sector, even for uranium, for example, uranium was banned in terms of mining for 25 years. So that ban has been lifted in July. And now we've had about 8 companies who, since July, have applied for mining minerals development license, and one has already also applied for a mining lease. So there's an immediate response from the industry as well. So the Queensland government is quite committed to ensuring that there's industrial progress in the state. The G20 being held in the state, and the dialogue around that in terms of GDP growth and growth resilience is as applicable to the state as the G20 nations around it. So we're quite confident that the state is competitive and a welcoming place for any investors to come and work in. Okay.
And so the changes that have been brought about in the framework, what would they be from the previous thing to now? What I'm constantly trying to get more concrete ideas of when you say that it has changed, whether for India or for Queensland, in the trade, political regime or the regulatory framework. What are these changes that now give you hope that the potential can seriously be exploited and is going to grow exponentially in the coming years?
So, from the Queensland government perspective, cutting red tape and cutting green tape is a step in the right direction. To get a regulatory framework around quicker assessments so that the turnover time for investors to start with their businesses lesser is a massive step forward. What could take 4 or 5 years previously is now less than 12 months. In terms of rail infrastructure, port development, new airports, these are being built, and this infrastructure is meant to proliferate business movement and facilitation in Queensland. In terms of availability of, I suppose, the trade and investment staff to guide companies from India, for example, who are wishing to come and work there, I have a team here, a small team in Bangalore, which looks after that, and we are most welcome to be contacted. But I also have a large team back in Brisbane who can help facilitate this movement towards setting up our investments and going forward. So the new state government has actually empowered this trade and investment body quite a lot to be able to help with the trade and investment aspects between the two countries. So that's, again, these are areas which set a framework around trade investment, which will help grow the trade in the coming years.
And on the Indian side, what are the changes you see that are obviously now there is more confidence in an investor coming from Queensland here? There is some change that has happened that you see the growth can be mutual and complementary.
I mean, if you look at the Prime Minister of India's agendas, one of his agendas is food security, and the other one is skills, and of course infrastructure as well. In fact, we can help in all of that. But skills, for example, if you want to do 550 million skilled people by 2025, we need a diversification. Now, Australia is a leading training provider for mining technologies, mining equipment, for vocational education. We got various colleges over here set up for retail training. There's areas around construction industry, where this vocational training has come into place. So we can certainly help in those areas in bringing those technologies across. I think that by itself is going to be a major determining factor for India's growth in the coming years to come. If we have the skilled labor to help build what it needs to build, then they'll be able to go where we want to go. The second aspect is in terms of education and higher education. I think there's lots of opportunity now that India has also opened up the education field with 100% FDI. Some of the universities and others will also be looking at it and testing the market to see how lucrative it is. The other aspects, of course, there's aspects in resources, which has been traditionally an alignment partner. And I would expect that there's a growing sentiment of competitiveness and I suppose a quality partner for India's growth in the resource sector. So those dialogues again have been tabled as part of the G20 agendas. And as you're probably aware, in September we have the finance and the central bank governors meet in Cairns in Queensland, and then we have the summit in November 15-16 for G20, which is again being held in Brisbane. So we'll have some Brisbane agreements, I suppose.
Okay. So could you just tell me what sets Queensland apart from any other region that India should be or could be trading with?
And if you imagine the equator as a mirror and you reflect India in the mirror, you get Queensland. And you get Queensland almost at the same distance from the equator. So what we do share between India and Queensland is the tropical and subtropical climate, the same challenges, the same climatic conditions, but also the technologies and things which work very well in Queensland have a higher chance of working in India. So I see that mutual cooperation and dialogue fructifying into meaningful transfer of technologies between the two.
Okay. So one immediate requirement from the Indian industry that you think if they want to fully enjoy the benefits of this trade agreement, what do you think that what they need to change, whether in their attitude or they need to change towards trade internationally, that could help them explore the opportunity in Queensland better than they have so far? I understand that there is some so far investment, but it hasn't yet taken off the way it could. The potential is much greater than where it is being explored. So one thing that
those are the bigger investments you're probably referring to.
Yeah.
There are lots of smaller investments available from say 50 million to 300 million. It doesn't have to be very, very large investments. And these could be stakes in existing mining operations. It could be stakes in exploration operations. A lot of minerals and resources are yet not mined in Queensland, and they are at an exploratory stage. This is the time to get in. This is the time to partner with the right people who have the know-how locally and pick up that stake so that you're in the ball, you're in the game, and you can start working with it early enough. The other aspect is ag invest. So invest in agricultural technologies, understand how it is, and hopefully have a bit of technology transfer back here as well, which will help the overall agriculture industry to grow here. And the third aspect of investment is in tourism investments. It just pains me sometimes to see that many other countries would come up and lap up all the tourism properties very quickly, which are lucrative properties. They're beautifully placed and can actually provide a good leverage to some of the Indian companies here. So I think the message I'm trying to convey is be focused on what you are looking for.
And quick action.
And act quickly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. No, I'm just because, so thank you so much.